Welcome to Law Experts. You are watching our program Life Skills. We have two young entrepreneurs, Ms. Aleena Ahmed and Ms. Arooj Ahmed. Both are our guests today. They are high school students at Jinnah International School, Lahore, Pakistan. Apart from their regular studies, they have deep interests in philosophy, entrepreneurship, human behavior, science, and technology. Assalamu alaikum, Ms. Aleena Ahmed, Ms. Arooj Ahmed. Today we are going to discuss the book titled as Getting Past No by William Ury. In our program today, we are going to talk about what do we mean by conflicts and what are the breakthrough strategies proposed by William Ury in this book. Ms. Aleena Ahmed, would you like to tell us what is a conflict?
Think of like a typical day. Over breakfast, you may get into an argument with your spouse about buying a new car. You think it is the time, but your spouse says, "Don't be ridiculous, you know we can't afford it right now." You arrive at work for a morning meeting with your boss. You present a carefully prepared proposal for a new project, but your boss interrupts you after a minute and says, "We already tried that and it didn't work. Next item." During your lunch hour, you try to return a defective toaster oven, but the salesperson refuses to refund your money because you did not have the sales slips. It's store's policy. In the afternoon, you bring an already agreed upon contract to a client for his signature. You have trumpeted the deal to your associates and made the necessary arrangements with manufacturing. But your client tells you, "I'm sorry, my boss refuses to okay the purchase unless you give us a 15% discount." Each of us faces tough negotiations with an irritable spouse, a dominating boss, a rigid salesperson, a tricky customer, or an impossible teenager. Under stress, even nice, reasonable people can turn into angry, intractable opponents. Negotiations can bog down or break us down, consuming our time, keeping us awake at night, giving us ulcers.
Mr. Arooj Ahmed, would you like to tell us what do you mean by negotiation?
Broadly defined, negotiation is the process of back and forth communication aimed at reaching agreement with others when some of your interests are shared and some are opposed. Negotiation is not limited to the activity of formally sitting across a table discussing a contentious issue. It is the informal activity you engage in whenever you try to get something you want from another person.
Ms. Aleena Ahmed, do you think that every conflict can be resolved?
One of my favorite negotiation stories is about a man who leaves his herd of 17 camels to his 3 sons as their inheritance. To the first son, he leaves half the camels. To the middle son, he leaves a third of the camels. And to the youngest son, he leaves a ninth of the camels. The 3 sons get into an intense negotiation over who should get how many because 17 does not divide by 2 or by 3 or by 9. Tempers become strained, so in desperation they consult a wise old woman. She listens to their problem and says, "Well, I don't know if I can help you, but if you want, at least you can have my camel." Now they have 18 camels, so the first son takes half of them, or 9 camels. The middle son takes his third, or 6 camels, and the youngest son takes his ninth, or 2 camels. 9 plus 6 plus 2 adds up to a total of 17 camels. There is 1 camel left over, so the brothers give it back to the old woman. Many of our negotiations and conflicts today are like those 17 camels. They may seem impossible to resolve with no apparent solution in sight. What we need to do is to step back from the situation, look at it through a fresh lens, and come up with an 18th camel. Finding that 18th camel in every conflict probably provides a solution.
Mr. Arooj Ahmed, whether a conflict is two-sided or there is any third side to it?
We tend to see conflict as two-sided, labor versus management, husband versus wife, or Republicans versus Democrats. And what we frequently fail to see is that there is always a third side. It's us, the surrounding community, the friends, allies, family members, and neighbors. The most fundamental way in which the third side can help us is to remind the parties of what's really at stake. The most fundamental way in which the third side can help is to remind the parties of what's really at stake. When we are locked in conflict, it can be easy to lose perspective and simply react. Human beings are reaction machines, and as the saying goes, when you're angry, you will make the very best speech you will ever regret. The third side can remind the arguing parties to go to a place of perspective. I call it the balcony. By reminding them to stop fighting and start talking, whether it's for the sake of the children or the family or our community or the future. William Ury called this mechanism of community engagement in conflict the third side, and the system he believes is probably what has kept our species alive.
Miss Aleena Ahmed, what is this book all about?
In this book, William Ury gives a 5-step breakthrough strategy for negotiating with an uncooperative, intransigent opponent. There are usually reasons behind a person's uncooperative behavior. People may behave badly in negotiations out of anger or fear because they don't know any more effective way to behave, because they don't see any benefit from negotiating, or because they see asserting their own power as the only alternative to being dominated. Intransigent behaviors are likely to provoke an angry response, so the effective negotiator faces the additional challenge of controlling their own reactions. According to William Ury, the goal of negotiations is not to destroy the other side, nor to dominate them. The goal is to win them over so that they become partners in a shared problem-solving process.
Miss Arooj, what is the 5-step breakthrough strategy?
Step 1. Do not react, go to balcony. Step 2. Do not argue, step to their side. Step 3. Do not reject, reframe. Step 4. Do not push, build them a golden bridge. Step 5. Do not escalate, use power to educate.
Miss Aleena, the first step of breakthrough strategy is do not react, go to balcony. Would you like to please explain it for us?
Ambrose Bierce says, "Speak when you are angry and you will make the best speech you will ever regret." So the first step is to bring the other party around to more effective negotiating behavior is controlling one's own behavior. When confronted with a difficult situation, people typically either strike back, give in, or break off the relationship. These are counterproductive responses. When facing a difficult opponent, Ury recommends going to the balcony. Do not react. Instead, keep your mental equilibrium by distancing yourself emotionally and viewing the situation objectively. Identify your underlying interests and your BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Decide whether it is worth negotiating in this situation. Take a moment to recognize the tactics your opponent is using and to recognize your own feelings and hot button issues. When in negotiations, pause, take a time out, or review the discussion to date in order to gain time to go to the balcony. Never make a decision on the spot. Always withdraw, even briefly, to review the settlement objectively.
Miss Arooj, step 2 is do not argue, step to their side. Please explain, what does it mean?
The second step is to disarm the opponent by stepping to their side. The goal is to reassure the opposite side and help them regain their own mental balance. Listen actively to them by asking clarifying questions and paraphrasing their statements. Acknowledge their points and feelings, apologize if appropriate, or at least express sympathy for their problem. Focus on areas of agreement. William Ury stresses the importance of saying and eliciting the word yes to reduce tensions and to foster an atmosphere of agreement. In expressing your own views, adopt a both and approach. Say yes and instead of but. Make I statements rather than accusative you statements. Whatever language you use, the key is to present your views as an addition to, rather than a direct contradiction of your opponent's point of view.
Miss Aleena, step 3 is do not reject, reframe. Would you explain it for us?
William Shakespeare says, "Craft against vice I will apply. The step number 3 is to reframe the dispute in terms of interests rather than positions. The best way to get the opposite side to focus on interests is to ask open-ended, problem-solving oriented questions. Ask why questions to elicit the opponent's interests. If they resist, ask them why not questions about alternative solutions. What if questions introduce new options without directly challenging the opponent's position? Position-based negotiating tactics can be handled by ignoring them or by reformulating them. Reinterpret firm positions as aspirations. Reinterpret personal attacks as expressions of concern or as attacks on the problem. If the opponents continue to use counterproductive tactics, it may be necessary to explicitly but tactfully identify the problematic behavior and have a negotiation about which tactics are appropriate.
Ms. Arooj, step 4 is do not push. Build them a golden bridge. Please explain.
Master Sun Tzu says, build your opponents a golden bridge to retreat across. Step 4, Ure says, is to build them a golden bridge to draw them from their position to an agreement. Make it easy for them to say yes by removing common obstacles to agreement. Opponents may resist ideas that are not their own. Avoid the temptation to tell other side what the solution is. Instead, ask them for their ideas in constructive criticisms. Offer them choices. An opponent's resistance may indicate that she still has unmet interests. Try to understand the other side's logic and perspective and do not overlook intangible interests such as needs for recognition, identity, or security. Many people will reject an agreement rather than lose face. Find ways for opponents to agree without appearing to compromise their principles or sacrifice their dignity. One way is to seek third-party recommendations. William Ure notes that a proposal that is unacceptable coming from you may be acceptable if it comes from third party. Give the other side credit for finding a solution. Suggest ways to present the agreement to constituents in the most favorable light. Finally, people may resist an agreement if it is too much change, coming too fast. Break the agreement into a progression of smaller agreements. If they resist, reassure them that no commitment is final until all are. Do not rush the final agreement. Allow the opponent to go to the balcony before making their decision.
Miss Aleena, step 5 is do not escalate. Use power to educate. What do you mean by that?
Sun Tzu says, the best general is the one who never fights. What if the other side refuses to take the golden bridge to an agreement? Step 5 complements step 4, offering ways to make it hard for the opponent to say no. The common reaction at this point is to resort to power tactics and try to force them to agree. This is counterproductive. William Ure says, instead of using power to bring your opponent to his knees, use it to bring him to his senses. The goal is to educate the other party to realize that an agreement is in their best interest. Ask them reality-testing questions about what will happen if no agreement is reached. Alert them without threatening to your BATNA. If they still resist agreement, you may need to deploy your BATNA. William Ure offers this rule for any exercise of power in negotiation. The more power you use, the more you need to defuse your opponent's resistance. Couple power tactics with conciliatory moves. Seek to neutralize your opponent's attacks rather than responding with counterattacks. Seek allies from the larger community. Third parties can inhibit threats or attacks and can pressure both sides to resume negotiations. Remind the opponent of the attractiveness of the proposed agreement and reassure them that your aim is mutual satisfaction because imposed settlements are unstable. It may be better to negotiate an agreement even in cases where you have a decisive advantage.
I'm highly obliged to both of you for sparing time from your busy schedule for our program. Dear viewers, I hope that you found our program interesting and beneficial. Please subscribe our channel and press bell icon so that you can receive our updates regularly. Take care till next time and keep watching our program Life Skills.